Okay, so we were talking about earlier, you got a phone call just as you were getting ready to go off and do your master's.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was very strange because apparently somebody was calling me as an agent, sending me out for a job, but to find out whether I would be interested in going on a job. That's what I thought I was receiving. But at the same time, I had never, it was so different. When agents had called me about a job, they would say, my name is John Doe. I work for William Morris Agency, and we have come across a role that we think you might be right for. We saw you in so and so and so. Would you be interested in? And then he would tell me about the role. And if it's a smaller agent, they try and ingratiate themselves. We think so much of your work. You're the first person we thought of when, that's the way they. This person was entirely different. It was almost like the Spanish Inquisition. Is this Ellen Holly? Yes. Would you be interested in auditioning for a soap opera? I guess so. And then be it so and so and so and so and so and so and so. I said, wait a minute. I can't remember all that. I have to write it down. Hold on. And I picked up his read and I went scrambling for paper and pencil and got on the phone. I said, would you mind repeating that, please? And so he repeated, and he was going so fast I hardly ever got it down. And I click. He was off of the phone. I almost didn't get the last scribble in. He went so fast. I didn't know whether it was a joke. I thought somebody might be making. I didn't understand the call. I just didn't understand it. I went to the thing. It turned out to be legitimate. It was some kind of part in a soap, and it sounded as if, well, who knows, but I still wasn't quite sure what had happened, but I came home and I didn't expect to get it because I know that, like I said earlier, they usually, when it's a black who's passing for white, they usually have a white girl. And I really don't, actually, I don't even see that as racism. I see it as money. For instance, with Susan, but in Imitation of Life, when she got the role, millions more people were going to be looking at that thing because she was playing the role than some black actress they'd never heard of called Ellen Holly. So I don't consider that racism exactly. It's racism because of the way the system works. And your landlord doesn't give a damn why you lost the job. They always, one way or the other, they don't mind. They just mind that you can't pay the rent, so you have to go and live with mommy and daddy until you get a better offer. So I didn't set that much store by it, and I thought, oh, well, well, a day or two at the most. The guy's back on the phone. So you got the job, so and so and so and so, and I'll be mailing dropping the contract in the mail. Now there'll be so many. You sign all of those and return it in the envelope that's going to be provided. And then he starts getting off the phone, and I went screaming into the phone. Wait a minute, to keep him from getting off the phone again. So I said to him, what are the terms? He said, a year at scale. Scale? I hadn't worked in scale in years. I said, I haven't worked in scale in years. I said, you go back to those scale, you go back to those people, and you tell them to add $25 to that salary to pay for your commission. I'll be damned if your commission is going to come out of my pocket. You've negotiated nothing. He said, I'll see what I can do. And hung up on me. I couldn't believe it. So anyway, the thing came in the mail. The $25 had been added. So I said to myself, at least he's listening. And scale would have meant I would be making $300 something a week. That was a hell of a lot more than the $86 I used to make at the New York Shakespeare Festival. So it was, in some ways, even though it was an insult professionally with my resume to be working for Scale, it was also an upgrade from the kind of money I was making in the theater. So I thought, $300. I called up Columbia, and I found out that my marks on the grade would be good for 2 semesters. So I didn't have to go running to Columbia. I could have a whole year to decide whether this thing was working out or not. So I figured, oh, well, I've got a fail-safe. So I signed the thing, dropped it in the mail, bang, and it's gone. Okay, the day comes when it's time to go to the theater, and I even to go to the first day on the set.
So just to back up for a second, this is One Life to Live.
Yes.
It's the soap opera, and the role that you auditioned for was Carla Bernari.
Whoever the heck she was going to be. Yeah.
So when you auditioned, did you know anything about the storyline, or what were you told?
I knew what the storyline was from the little piece of dialogue that I read. Mm-hmm. But once again, because it was a black who was in the thing passing for white, I figured it was going to be cast with a white girl. Mm-hmm. And the irony was that indeed, when the job first went out to agents, one of the reasons why on their end of the thing they were so frustrated was because all the agents sent white girls for the first go-round. This was the second go-round, where apparently they were asking for the real thing, so everybody was scuffling to try and find. Anyway, so I knew that little bit about it, but I didn't know all that much about it, what it was. So, and I remember the taxi ride. For the very good reason that the taxi driver, I was in such a good mood. The taxi driver said, "Oh, why are you so happy?" I said, "I'm on my way to a job." I said, and so he said, "Oh, well, who knows? One of these days you may even get to play Shakespeare." And I fell out laughing because I played 8 leads in Shakespeare, honey, for $86 a week. I'm about to make $300 a week. So that's why I remember the phone call from the taxi driver. Uh-huh. So anyway, I spent my first day on that show, and I felt like Alice dropping through the rabbit hole into Wonderland. Because in very short order, I learned, to my shock, that I had just become, in quotes, the first black star in a central role in the history of daytime television. That's the way the thing was being marketed. That was jaw-dropping to me. That's when I discovered it wasn't just another. And what I must say is, from day one, you know, the crew on that show, when I found out how important the role was, and when I found out I was playing opposite 2 absolutely drop-dead gorgeous men, they were so gorgeous, I was intimidated. I really thought, oh, what? It was a white guy called Bob Milley, stunning. A black guy called Peter Deanda, stunning. And I'm in the middle of this. I couldn't get over what had just happened to me. And so I was nervous, and I also knew I had never done a job that lasted more than a week, and the money was already set before the part was even cast because it was so routine, nothing, and so I didn't know quite what to do, and I just sort of rode with the thing, and I found out that I was in this extraordinary storyline that this woman was writing that was absolutely brilliant. She was...
The woman was...
that's part of the weird tale. Mm-hmm. I thought she was just the staff writer. I had no idea she was anybody but the staff writer. And she was so nice. I was telling you about the crew. I was terrified because I was so used to shooting things to the last row of the third balcony. And here's the camera right here. The crew was in my corner from day one. The crew was remarkable. I thank God that the character was having a nervous breakdown because I couldn't even hold my script. I was really all over the place. That crew got it, and they sent out a vibe of support that was so tangible you could have cut it with a pair of scissors. And they watched my back for the rest of the ride. God bless that crew. That's the first bunch of folks I fell in love with. Then I still couldn't believe I was. Anyhow, what she was doing. First of all, Agnes Nixon is a genius. She isn't just a wonderful writer. She's a genius. She was going to make she approached it very mechanically. She wanted to make a soap this time around. She'd done another one that didn't get anywhere. This time around, she was going to make sure that everybody heard her. So here we are in 1968, which is the most critical time of the 60s, and the 60s were the most critical time domestically of the country. Here's this, in 1968, they just did last night, they just did a whole thing on it because it was Time magazine 20 years later did a cover called 1968, the year that shaped a generation. This was when there was the Tet Offensive that changed the dynamics in the Vietnam War. They had captured the USS Pueblo, a warship of America that the North Koreans had captured and were now holding hostage. Then Martin Luther King was assassinated. Then Bobby was assassinated. The Democratic Convention under Abbie Hoffman, or the bloody riots of the Apollo circled the moon, and everybody was horrified when Jackie Kennedy married Aristotle Onassis. It was one thing after that, and the guys at the Olympus with the salute for the whatever, everything was going on in 1968. That was what was happening in the world. What she was capable of doing, and it has never been done quite this brilliantly before because she did it as something that occurred at the nexus of something instead of all by itself. In addition to picking that particular time to do what she was about to do, she also is a genius at knowing what the series can do. If you say you love somebody called Jennifer Lawrence and you love her work and you want to go to see her in a movie, you will see her, the movie will occur in 2 hours of time. You may adore her, you may love her, but you have only spent 2 hours of your own life on Jennifer Lawrence. In a series, you can do something much more interesting. You can dig deeper because you can get at somebody again and again and again and again. And that's what she did. She did something so that people would make an investment in a certain set of people for 5 months of time, give 5 months of their life believing that these people are XYZ, only to suddenly slap them with a situation where they were something entirely different. And the people who had paid an investment of 4 months of their lives had the rug snatched out from under them. So they had to make another adjustment. So she put those things together. What was happening in 1968? Because that Sleeping Beauty in the trunk that she had done 5 years earlier and couldn't get done year after year after year after year after year, that she had written with her love in her heart and cared about with her heart and soul, she had to put away in the trunk with mothballs and finally face the fact. She figured out how to get everybody's attention. She put her finger up and saw what the wind was blowing. She saw the dogs and the hoses and the pictures going around the world in connection with the civil rights movement. And so this is what she wrote. She started in a town called Llanview with a Jewish family, a black woman called Sadie Gray, there was another family, a Wolick family, a Polish family, and the Lord family, which was going to be the star of the show. She was going to be the Victoria Lord, part of the Philadelphia Main Line. That was the storyline that's going to be a little more important than everything else. But all these other storylines were going to be important too. The black woman, and who was played by Lillian Heyman, who was going to be the head of the housekeeping at Landview, had an apartment in the same building as Anna Wolik, who was the Polish family, and they'd talk from time to time. And as things worked out, she had a daughter, Clara, who had died. And they became very good friends and talked whatever and so on. Okay. 4 months into the show, 5 months into the show. Oh no, well, almost immediately. The story was going to go a month or so into the show. A woman came to town who was a mystery. Everybody knew she was important because she was on almost every day of the week. So they knew that she was going to be some kind of major story, but they couldn't figure out what she was going to be because she wasn't the usual blonde, blue-eyed, leading female. She looked very exotic. And she had this exotic name, Carla Benari. What's that? What's more interesting, she lived in this cruddy apartment, this shabby apartment, with all these pictures on the wall from movie posters and Sarah Bernhardt and this and that. But when she was having a nervous breakdown, and she was going to the doctors. When she got dressed to go to the doctors, she would emerge from that place like a butterfly. She was very, very glamorous and what have you and so on. And she'd go to this drop-dead gorgeous #1 guy, a doctor played by Robert Milley, gorgeous white doctor who started falling in love with her because of her neediness and her glamour and all this. And he was so worried about her that he wanted to make sure that what's going wrong with her is all in her mind and it's not pathological. So he put her in the hospital in hopes of having a whole set of tests made to make sure she wasn't suffering from a physical something. And she falls in love with a black intern. Well, in the world of the soap opera, a white woman falling in love with a black man, people started looking at that soap opera because they were saying, this is something new. We better see where it's going. So she played that triangle for about 3 or 4 months. And on the 5th month, in which everybody's invested all of their energy in learning about all these people for these 5 months, that day, on a Friday, deliberately chosen for Friday, the camera started following a whole bunch of people through their daily, up to the last thing, including Carla Benari and Lillian Heyman, who's Sadie, and a whole bunch of other things. And at the end of the day, 5 minutes before that, Sadie and Carla Benari meet in front of Anna Wolik's door. She's visiting her neighbor. She's going there for some other reason. They stand there and they look at each other, and Sadie looks at me and she says, "Clara!" And I say, "Mama." Cut to black. Well, everybody got on the phone that week. Did you see that Friday? She's Clara, that dead girl that was supposed to. Oh, everybody, you know, that business of pulling the rug out and turning it upside down. So the world checked in on Monday to get the backstory. The backstory was that she was an actress and she wanted to be a big star, and she went to the bright lights in the big city and found out nobody could give a damn. And also it wasn't helpful to be black, so she started passing for white. And that didn't do too well either, and she ended up on some lousy bus and truck tour that had come back to town. That's why the place was so shabby. It was a rental where these people bus and truck tours all around the country. So she hated what she'd been doing. She felt revolted by it. That's part of the reason why she was having the nervous breakdown. And she wanted to stay. So she let somebody else take her part. And she started going to the doctor to get herself back in shape so that she could finally look up her mother and make nice finally and say, I'm sorry, Mommy, and whatever, and so on, and blah, blah. So that's the backstory. But, oh, brother, that Clara Mama thing, that really was so extraordinary that a lot of people consider it the most powerful moment in daytime. And that's because Agnes Nixon was a genius. She was, like I said, she was the matrix of the cross between, oh, that's a white guy, oh, that's a black guy, oh, who is she that she's getting? And the people who were angry when they thought she was a white woman seeing a black man, when they found out she was black, they were worried about she was a black woman getting engaged to a white guy, and everybody was going through all of their making adjustments, and it was absolutely crazy. But that's how brilliant she was. That was one of the most brilliant, for my money, it's the most brilliant use of the serial form in the history of the world. Anyhow, when I got on that show, this gentle creature, who I thought was just the staff writer, immediately invited me up to, she lived in Rosemont, in an inn that used to be, in the early days, it went back so early, it was almost like a landmark. It used to be an inn, and she lived in this wonderful house.
This is Agnes Nixon?
This is Agnes Nixon. She lives in Rosemont, Pennsylvania. I hadn't ever seen her before. I just saw her ever so briefly around the hearing. I am invited up to this. She was very gentle and very a recessive sort of personality. I went up to her house, and I was fascinated by all the things she told me. For one thing, what she did immediately that always remained in my mind, she said, I want you to meet the real Sadie Gray. And she introduced the woman to her, who she said, I could call this woman my wife because she does everything. She gets all the meals. She does all the housework. She brings up my children. She does everything so that I can write. I owe her so much. I owe her my career. And you should have seen the woman. She was standing there just glowing because her employee had handed her one of the gifts of a lifetime, building a character on the basis of who she was. Oh, she was lovely. And the same name, Sadie, same name. And then it was a wonderful meal. Everybody was lovely to me. And then we sat down, and Agnes Nixon and I had a conversation that must have lasted about at least 3 hours. I was thrilled because I realized that as the staff writer, she was allowing me to have input into how this character was going to be handled. And I went into everything that I had gone into with other people about the box in which I worked, so that it would all be motivated in terms of what. And years later, in 1988, when she was 20 years into the future, when she was honored by the Museum of Broadcasting, she would say in so many words, in the first draft of her presentation to the she said it was practically a collaboration, because I learned so much from her. She practically wrote the part herself. So the thing that was so great about that storyline was it not only had all the mechanics and what have you to make it run, it also had a level of authenticity because she went into everything with me. And she also let me know who she was in terms of the woman, how she got to be who she was in terms of knowing how to write this. Agnes Nixon was the star pupil of the woman who had invented the soap opera, i.e. Irna Phillips. Mm-hmm. That's how she knew the formula. And she went into the formula. There's a very specific formula for soap operas that is entirely different from anything else. In the first place, because they come on during the day and they're targeted to women, women are more important in soap operas than men are. In the evening, it's Matt Damon, Christian Bale, Tom Cruise, Denzel Washington, the men of the ball game most of the time, and the woman's there for the ride, and they're there forever at 100. They're still playing the role, and the latest one is 16 years old, not playing opposite them, and you know how that goes. Anyway, this is how a soap opera differs entirely, because it's targeted to women, and also because it is meant to last not for the 10 years of a Dallas or a Dynasty, but for decades. Guiding light from the time, and Erna Phillips, this was guiding light from the time it started in radio until it ended in television, lasted for, guess what, 72 years. That's how long it lasted. Maybe 71 or 73, but it's up there, okay? This is the formula. And she sat down and she told it to me exactly the way it's supposed to work. You take a handful of families, just like she had taken the Wolicks, the Greys, the Siegels, and the Lords. You call them tentpole characters. That's just what they do. They hold up the tent. They're going to be there forever. And I'm going to use General Hospital as the example because that's the one that still exists. And everybody knows those characters. This is what the theory is. Say you have a woman who starts looking at General Hospital when she's in college, you know, when she has her lunch hour, she starts looking at General Hospital. She goes out into the workforce, she forgets it. She gets engaged, she gets married, she gets pregnant, she comes home, she hasn't been home. She decides she wants to be a mother, full-time mother. And so she stays, at least until the kid's ready to go to school, and then she'll start thinking about getting back into the... She hasn't looked at the damn thing for 7 years. She turns it on. She turns on General Hospital. There's Emily McLaughlin. There's John Berardino. There's Rachel Ames. That's who was there when she started looking a long time ago. That's who she's going to see when she comes back. They're the hook that grabs you. No matter what you have done or for how long, when you go back there, these people are going to be kept from the moment they open the show to the day they die or the show dies, till death do us part. That's what a tentpole character is. And the whole point is, just like you don't shoot your mother when she passes 40, people will stick with you if you're somebody they get to know like a neighbor, or that's why they will hire. You can have a viable career in soaps if you were in your 80s and your 90s, like Jeannie Cooper, like Helen Wagner, like
Frances Reed.
All of them. Mm-hmm. Forever. You're there forever till death do you part. Because it works every time. You grab the tentpole people grab them on that first snap-on, and they'll say, "Oh, look how interesting! She's not married to him anymore. She's married to so and so. Oh my!" And they get involved with the new people. But that's what they do. You have your tentpole and the transient characters that come in with the new faces and the fresh faces, and they interface and differently and what have you. But that's how the thing lasts. And she explained that to me, and in the course of explaining it to me, seemed, I thought, to infer that now that Lillian and I were the Grey family, we were tentpole characters who are going to be there for the rest of the ride. Because once it was clear that I was black, she went marching into battle waving the flag of the equal opportunity employer. She said, that's when she told the world that I am creating the first black star in the history of daytime. I'm giving this woman the same opportunity that my white characters are going to get, and she's going to have the same history and arc of whatever, and it is on the basis of the belief of media, not just my belief, but the belief of the press, the public, and the history books, that what she meant was that I was going to be there for the full length of the ride with the same kind of a career thing as her white stars. And that's what I came away from the thing believing, that that's what Agnes Nixon believed, but I had no idea who Agnes was, aside from the staff writer. So when I looked, first of all, so I settled into this gorgeous career. The first alert I had that something was going wrong was when in 1969, overnight, the two gorgeous men were gone. They vanished. I'd never gotten to know them very well. I didn't know them well enough to call them up on the phone and say, where'd you go? They just vanished. And nobody said anything to me. And all of a sudden I was paired with somebody totally different. Now I knew that a station had canceled in Texas. So I thought to myself, I wonder if they're panicking because a station canceled in Texas.
Because of your storyline specifically?
I didn't know. But when all of a sudden the two gorgeous men were gone and I couldn't make up my mind what the heck was happening, and I knew that had happened, I didn't know. But all I knew is they were gone. And another thing had happened that disturbed me. As for they paired me, they brought in a new character. And he wasn't gorgeous. He was an elderly character actor, a very nice man, but he was supposed to be a congressman that spent most of his time in Washington, D.C., and we had some sort of supposed, I never knew what it was supposed to be, a friendship or whatever. All I knew was it was so exciting, it would have put an insomniac in a coma. And I was parked on the back burner on the stove with this, was it? This nothing burger? I didn't understand what was happening, and I wondered if and I remember, and this is 1969, this is a year into the show, I was brand new to the world of camera because of all the things I've gone into in relation to my other career. I remember as if it were yesterday, I was sitting in this cold, the director wanted to give me instructions about some of the following day's work. I remember that the room was so cold, and I remember wishing that I brought a sweater. And it's because I was so new to camera, I didn't realize the room is cold because of the machinery. It's just like surgery. Because of the machinery, they want a cold up, and I was freezing. But I remember that over in that left corner, the guys were putting together something, closing down the machinery, and I heard the crew talking about the fact that Agnes Nixon was going to open another soap, and she was already working on it and what have you. And so I thought, oh, well, I guess Agnes put us on the back burner because she has something extra to go through to open this thing, and then maybe she'll get around to giving me a real thing. And then 1969, toward the end of that, I knew that my my 1 year thing was about to be up.
Contract?
was going to be up. It was going to be up in about a month. So what had always astonished me is, even though I didn't get on very well with that guy, the agent who had called me, and it was really kind of ugly, I thought that when I turned out to be the first black star in the central role in the history of daytime, that he would come ready to make up and ride the rocket to heaven with me. He never got in touch with me. And I spent years trying to figure that out. I thought, you couldn't have been so nasty on the phone, that he wasn't, this has turned out too well. What's going on? That I never heard from him. Well, I don't have to go to him. I don't have to go to him. I know what I'm going to do. Mind you, this is a month away from my contract being up. I knew. I was glad. I thought, oh, hey, wait a minute, this is an opportunity. This guy is going to be off my back legally. In another month, I'll be able to get rid of him, and I can bring in an agent who is a dream. So I got myself all set for when my contract was up. I was going to get in touch with the most brilliant agent in the business, a guy by the name of Stark Hesseltine. Let me tell you about Stark Hesseltine. I got it. Most of the agents didn't want to see me because they knew I couldn't get any work on a camera. They say to their they say to their secretaries, "Get rid of her. She's uncastable. Tell her we're not taking anybody." You know, they went. This man was decent enough to give me an appointment. So anyway, Norman and I sat down. This is Stark Hesseltine. I'm going to pretend you're me, okay? This is what he said to me. Look, honey, I think you're gorgeous. And I think you're one of the most talented actresses in this town. Brilliant. But there's no market for you. You're not where they're looking, what they're looking for. You can't do anything for me, and I can't do anything for you. I can't make any money for you. What's the point? I fell in love with him right away. Because anybody who tells you the truth in this cockeyed business is saving you a lot of trouble. And what Stark Hesseltine had just handed me was a coat of armor. Because what he was saying to me, it's got nothing to do with you. It has to do with the business. I'm tired of knocking my head against a concrete wall. So from then on, from that day forward, because he was so brilliant and I had so much respect for him, and he sat down and he did that, he gave me a coat of armor. Never again has a no in my life, in this crazy business, ever been internalized as something that was wrong with me. That's what he gave me. Okay, so anyway, he started loosening up and talking about what it was like to take, I mean, he had signed Lee Chamberlain. Lee Chamberlain was gorgeous, brilliant, how he couldn't get her arrested. He was tired of that and so on. And I felt like a psychiatrist. I was sitting there listening to all these stories. I felt like I was a psychiatrist. And it's funny, at the end of the thing, we both had formed some kind of a bond. I respected the hell out of him for all the reasons I just told you. And in his way, I was very aware he was utterly charmed by the grace with which I had swallowed the castor oil. So I went away from Stark Hesseltine knowing that if I was ever able to come to him with a part already in my hand and say, would you represent me on this? He would have represented me in a New York minute. So I sat back and I thought, oh, well, I'll wait until it's time. Well, almost a few days later, a month before it was time for that to be up, they put a piece of paper in front of me and said, this is non-negotiable. This is what we're prepared to do if you are interested in playing this role for another year. We will continue it for another year. And if it's not, if you're not interested, well, you know, you're welcome to pick up your marbles and go play someplace else. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I had brought them the publicity of the world. When she went out there and said, I'm creating the first black star, and she had gotten phenomenal publicity. She had gotten, I was in the head of Newsweek, and my picture and the whole story about that. TV Guide, a huge article. In that particular TV Guide, there had been 2 huge articles, one the Sonny and Cher thing on the cover, and the one in the back about me, and that was in the day. A 3-page article with my picture all over the place, and that, a 3-page article written by a brilliant guy called Ross Drake that made it so arresting. He was such a marvelous writer. He summed it all up with the title. He said, black, but not black enough. And then the subtitle was, there are few parts for black actresses, and even fewer for those who don't look the part. That's Ross Drake. They've got this gorgeous picture of me, and he starts from a sentence that the moment you start the sentence, there's enough of a hook that if you did start reading it, you'd read it all the way through. That's how good that article was. Now, this is back in the days when television guide, the TV Guide, was the only place where you could find out what was on that box. Not the 100,000 places you have now, including the roll-ups on the TV. There was only one place. That meant that every single family in the country that had a television set, the TV Guide was sitting right next to the television set. That meant that every single family in this country that had a television set read that article about me and knew that Agnes Nixon had written a soap called One Life to Live. And then Cy Peck, thrilled with the tsunami of letters that he had gotten for How Black Do You Have to Be, gave me a whole page in the Arts and Leisure section of the New York Times, a whole page in the Arts and Leisure section with great big 4-column blow-ups of my face and my face with Peter, and let me write the whole article. She'd gotten all this out of me, and she's giving me a 20, not she, I shouldn't say she, because I didn't know at that point that Agnes had anything to do with it. That was the problem. They're giving me a $25 annual raise. After that, behind that kind of, I couldn't believe what was happening. And so I didn't sign. I just didn't sign because I knew something was going terribly wrong. And Doris Quinlan, who was the producer, said to me, what I thought was, when I saw the credits and it said Creative Horizons at the end of the show, I thought that was a subsidiary of ABC. And the studio, which is the only place where the actors saw, because we were way uptown in the studio, and the power was in the tower downtown in the great big skyscraper with ABC up on the top floors. I thought a whole bunch of white guys sitting around a conference table up there in the tower were the ones who were figuring out all these lousy contracts I was getting. I had no idea it was coming from some different place. So I still thought that's where this funny contract was coming from. So Doris Quinlan said to me, she said, after a couple of days, she said, you do understand, don't you? This is non-negotiable. I said, yes, I understand. And in retrospect, I think she was getting anxious because the powers that be, wherever they were sitting on her and saying, when are you going to get her to sign, for goodness sakes, and so and so. So she was having to ask, so she stopped speaking to me. She just froze me out. She wouldn't even talk to me. And I panicked. And I signed. I cut my throat, because once they get away with that, that's the protocol for the rest of your life. On any renewal, I would be given the choice. This is what we're going to pay you. If you're happy with it, fine. If you aren't, feel free to take a walk. That was the protocol for the rest of the time, so there was never any representation from anybody. And I thought I didn't know what was what or who was who or what was going on. I just knew that things were happening that I didn't understand. And that was 1969, and that Nothing Burger. 1970, she got, Agnes Deacon opened All My Children. Both shows were a half an hour. She put them together with All My Children first, so that All My Children was able to, one of the things that I did not know, I would not find out because nobody was telling me what the hell was going on. What I did not know is a third of the audience that was watching that show was black. A third of the audience. If I'd had an agent, I would have known it. They have the internal breakdowns. Nobody. There was nobody to tell me anything. That's one thing that I hope that any young person going into this business will recognize. Information is everything. You have got to have the data. You have got to have the information. I had no information. So I thought, oh my God, well, maybe it was the fact that the station canceled in Texas and they panicked. What happened? I didn't know what happened, but I went along with the program. I had no idea a third of. Okay, she pairs these things together like Siamese twins so that All My Children can feed off of this one, All One Life. Everybody who was looking at the Call a Storyline as a virtual block, when Agnes Nixon put a huge black storyline in All My Children with John Donnell starring, she inherited the entire block of black voters, and overnight, All My Children picked up the same kind of percentages and literally like that. So people started to looking at them as if they were joined Siamese twins, and it was a success overnight also. All right, that's 1970. 1971, Gillian Spencer, who had played the original Vicky, never had a problem with what happened to me because she was in love and she was about to quit the show and marry and go off to California with her husband to go to Hollywood. A lovely young girl called Joanne Dorian had been the second Vicky. And she was lovely. They didn't give her a chance. If they had given her a chance, they hired her because she looked like Gillian. But she wasn't Gillian. She was her own person, and they never gave her the time to make the part her own. So the fact that they got rid of her almost at once, I thought was unfair, and it must have been unnerving to her. She didn't deserve that. She deserved the time to work into the part. And so they hired somebody completely different from her, and they hired a third Vicky. And what was another wake-up call to me that I didn't know what the hell was going on was that even though she only had 3 professional credits to her name, she was allowed to come aboard with the most powerful agent in show business, Robbie Lance, who, mind you, this is a long time ago, whose client list included Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Marlene Dietrich, Betty Davis, Frank Langella. He wasn't there to see that she made 10 cents. He was there to make sure that she was going to be the financial beneficiary of everybody else's work, including my own. So there she is in 1971. Meanwhile, the folks who had gotten, and I mean white folks as well as black folks who had gotten all tied up with the Call a Storyline and were looking out for my back, when are you going to give her to quit this nonsense about this? And they realized they had to be a lot more clever about taking all of the sex out of my storyline. They found a much smarter way to do it. They brought in Al Freeman Jr., made him the immediate star of the show. made Lillian and me into satellites as his wife and mother-in-law. He came, he was the captain of police. He married me in a real fast courtship. And he was put out there as the cop who went from one white storyline to the next, detecting, 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 while Lillian and I stayed home in the kitchen, drank cups of coffee, and gossiped about the neighbors to keep them all caught up on the white storylines. This is 1972 as Al comes aboard. Years later, I'd find out he came in with a negotiated salary negotiated by his lawyer. His lawyer had gotten $100,000. That's what he came in with. He was given, I knew he was making more because he was put in one of the star dressing rooms, but I never dreamed he was making 4 times what I was making. What was so great about that for them from Al Freeman was, first of all, Lillian and I, like I said, were just satellites sitting around talking about that. The thing about Al was, there wasn't a word that came out of his mouth from the moment he joined the show to the day he was terminated that couldn't have been said by a white policeman. They didn't write him as a black man. They wrote him as a cop. And a generic cop at that. Al was always trying to get them to make it somebody particular. You know, because I mean, what you remember about Sherlock Holmes is that Sherlock Holmes has that deerstalker hat, and he's got the pipe, and he smokes the hookah. You know, he's made, Al would keep trying to get them to write him as a specific, not necessarily even a black guy, but just a specific somebody. Tweak it so that he's something, but like I said, there never was a word out of his mouth that couldn't be said by a white guy. So he wasn't even written as anything but a generic, not a specific cop, but a generic cop. So they were safe in that. And as for me, there's Lillian and I talking over coffee about whatever and so on. And lo, that's 72. So it's 69, along comes Bert Skelly. 70, All My Children opens on the backs of all the broad. 72 comes along, and there comes Al Freeman. Now, the real surprise came in 1973. In 1973, I'm sitting in the makeup room. That's the source of all my, because I didn't even know what to do to get information. The only place that information came to me was the gossip in the makeup room. That's the only place. I'm sitting there waiting to get my face done in the makeup room, and I hear that Agnes Nixon is selling One Life to Live to ABC for $6 million. Huh? That's the first time I found out that this little gentle lady over here was not just the staff writer. Because when I got all these dumb stories with the, all the things that were happening, I figured it was those people up there in the tower. She was Creative Horizons. She was the CEO. She was the whole, she owned the whole, and was she clever? She was a brilliant writer, even more brilliant for money. She knew all about money, because if she had sold that show at the very beginning, they would have gotten it for spit, because it had no track record. She waited until that show was the hottest thing in daytime, and then she sold it for $6 million, which was incredible money at the time, and became the seed money of a fortune that would go into the tens and tens and tens of millions. But that was where her seed money came from. And so she turned me over to ABC. ABC took hold of me as a fringe character, Lillian and as Alice, the big show. And that's the way the rest of the thing went. But what was so fascinating about all that was that an enormous amount of, I didn't still get any notion of what was really happening. All I knew was things were happening and I didn't have the information. I had to make a whole readjustment on the fact that she was the one who had made all those contracts and what have you. And no sooner do I do that than I'm working for ABC, and it's a whole different ball game. I never understood what happened to me after that. The irony is I made, even as the third Vicky came aboard in 71, Al came aboard in 72, and she made all that, in 73 she sold that show for $6 million. They had nothing to do with making her able to sell that show in $6 million. I did. I had everything to do with the fact that that show was so valuable. Because immediately I'll go back into what she got from hiring us. Immediate. I was responsible. In 73, I made less money, not more money.
This is under ABC?
No, under her.
Under her.
I made less money. My last salary from Agnes Nixon in 73, when she sold that show, was less than I made in 1969. Al and the third Vicky had nothing to do with making that show worth $6 million. I had everything to do with it. Let me tell you what happened in terms of immediately that she went out and I was outed as a black person. And she went out there and said, in addition to all the stuff I told you in terms of the incredible press in those days, they weren't paying attention to soaps. My God, only women watch them? How could it be important? It's in the daytime, they're selling little items like soap and toilet paper and Kleenex. You know, I mean, that was the general attitude. She got major attention. And so she gets an historic legacy for breaking racial barriers and bringing diversity and social depth, relevance. All of her, that was her historic legacy, was that she turned soap from some silly little something with like Romance of Helen Trent for lovesick housewives into something with character and depth and social significance and relevance. That's her historic legacy, and broke the racial barrier to boot and what have you. So she got the historic legacy out of it. She got saturation coverage from the fan magazines. Everybody who wasn't in power, everybody else was wonderful. The soap fan magazines were wonderful to me. It was so exciting to them to have a first black somebody in daytime. They were all over the place. I was the one that did all the glamour layouts and the talking and the whatever. They were always in. There's nothing you can do with an Al Freeman who wears a suit every day, you know. I mean, it's much more fun to follow the women with all their furbelows and their whatever. I had brought all that stuff and Paul Dennis, and I would like to say to Paul Dennis was one of the major editors at Sterling Publications, and they produced almost all of all of the soap magazines. Paul Dennis couldn't have been more elegant and more wonderful to me. He acted as if I wished the people in my place. He felt I was an enormous addition to daytime, and everything that he did in relation to me was so elegant. It's a pleasure to be able to salute that kind of a person on a camera. Paul Dennis, everybody, what a decent man. Anyway, so she got saturation coverage. She got a quarter to a third of her audience was black, but she also got a whole bunch of white women who were into my storyline. God bless them. They're the ones that made them do something about my storyline, because they were way ahead of the white guys in power. They were waiting for me to turn into a real soap opera diva, because do you know what really should have happened to me as a soap opera, a true soap opera? I'll take two. She came later, but I'll take her because she's a wonderful example of it. And Eileen Fulton, are you aware of Eileen Fulton? That's As the World Turns. right? Do you remember her? Okay, I'll take Susan Lucci. Those two ladies were real soap opera divas because each one of them had 8 gorgeous husbands apiece, to say nothing of the men that never made it to the altar. In Susan's case, I think I should probably say 7.
Right, she married one
Because
twice.
she married one twice, yes, yes. So anyway, 8 husbands apiece. That's what a lot of white women who were watching our show wanted to happen to me. They wanted to see me marry Peter DeAnda and then go for, this is what was, if what Agnes Nixon said she was going to write for me had been written as she pretended she was writing it, what would have happened to me would have been totally, I wouldn't have been dealing with eunuchs and the old folks home and all those other things I was dealing with. What would have happened, I would have married Peter DeAnda and go through a whole passing parade of drop-dead, gorgeous black men. Meanwhile, Robert Milley would have married some gorgeous Grace Kelly, frosty blonde from the main line, and had a problem with her because she was sleeping around. And we'd cry on each other's backs and maybe get to know each other way back. No, but no. And we'd pull away and go back to whoever we were. That's where that story would have gone if it had been played out. There were a whole bunch of white women writing to me that wanted that storyline to play out that way. And they knew it because they were all over my fan mail. And that's not my imagination. They were very open about it. I mean, I would get my fan mail slashed open, read, and put back in the envelope, and the envelope's handed to me without anybody even bothering to reseal it. So they were all over my fan mail. They knew just what the public wanted, but they had no intention of getting involved with a whole bunch of, it finally boiled down to their absolute inability to allow a whole parade of gorgeous black men have their day in court, so to speak. So they had to do it the way they did it, marry me to Al, and then Al go in his direction while Lillian Heyman and I stayed home and whatever and so on. Okay, so I'm turned over to ABC. And that's another whole story. Because it gets into a whole bunch of stuff.
Shall we continue or do you want to take a short break?
Up to you.